They thought you wouldn't notice. That's the funny part. They assumed you were too busy living your life, too distracted, too detached to feel it. But something changed, didn't it? A strange shift in the air, a subtle tension that wasn't there before. Because somewhere behind your back, something moved. Not randomly, not accidentally, deliberately. People who once smiled at you, people who once laughed with you, people who once called you close. They started talking, not out loud, not in front of you, but in private, in group chats, in quiet conversations where your name was mentioned with lowered voices and careful words. They weren't sharing memories, they were rewriting them. They weren't telling stories, they were shaping a narrative. Because you became a problem. Not because you did something wrong, but because you didn't stay small. You grew, you became confident, you became harder to control. And when that happens, people don't always celebrate you, they feel threatened by you. So they didn't come to you, they went around you, they compared notes. They twisted moments, they questioned your intentions, they tried to decide what you really meant. And all of it had one purpose, to figure out how to make you feel something, how to make you doubt, how to make you react. And eventually, jealousy. Not anger, not confrontation, not honesty, jealousy. Because jealousy is subtle. Jealousy is quiet. Jealousy can be denied. They didn't want to fight. They wanted a reaction. So they planned something. A post, a photo, a moment. A new version of their life designed just carefully enough to reach you. Not everyone, just you. They wanted you to see it. They wanted it to land in your chest. They wanted you to think, even for a second, did I lose? Did they replace me? Are they happier without me? But what they didn't realize, what they never saw coming, is that by trying to play with your emotions, they exposed their own. They didn't wake up one morning and randomly decide to do this. This was built to as a carefully conning. When people feel replaced by your growth, they don't come at you directly. They study you first. They watch how you move. They notice how you stop chasing, how you stopped explaining, how you stopped needing their approval. And that's when something uncomfortable starts happening inside them. They begin to feel irrelevant. Your silence starts to scare them. Your peace starts to insult them. Your independence starts to threaten them. So they do what insecure people always do when they lose control. They look for a way to get it back. And the easiest way to control someone is not through power. It's through emotion. Because when they can make you feel something, anger, jealousy, sadness, confusion, they feel powerful again. They feel like they still matter. So they looked at you and thought, what would still reach them? Not an apology, not the truth, not accountability. They didn't want to fix anything. They wanted to shake you, and jealousy is the perfect weapon for that. Because jealousy hits the ego, it hits the heart, so they created a moment. Maybe it was a relationship they suddenly made very public. Maybe it was success they suddenly started showing off. Maybe it was happiness they suddenly needed everyone to see, but it wasn't organic. It was designed. Every angle, every caption, every smile, all of it was aimed at one invisible target. You. They weren't posting for the world, they were posting for your reaction. They were waiting for you to check their page, waiting for you to view the story, waiting for you to feel something. Because deep down, they weren't trying to prove anything to others. They were trying to prove something to themselves. They needed to believe that you still care, that you still notice, that you still feel something when they appear. Because if you don't, then they lose the only thing that ever made them feel important, your attention. And the scariest part, they didn't even realize how obvious they were being. When someone is truly happy, they don't need an audience. When someone is truly confident, they don't need witnesses. But when someone is empty, they need proof. So they built a stage. They put on a performance. And they waited for you to sit in the audience. What they didn't understand is that you had already walked out of the theater. They made it look natural. That was the whole point. They wanted it to seem spontaneous, effortless. Like their life just magically became amazing the moment you stopped being part of it. But behind that illusion was something very different. Planning, flighty, they positioned. They didn't just show happiness, they curated it. They didn't just move on, they made sure you could see it. Because this wasn't about living, it was about being seen living. And there is a huge difference. Every photo, every appearance beside them, all of it was designed to send one message: look what you lost. But here's the secret they didn't realize they were revealing. When someone needs to show you what you lost, it means they still believe you had something they needed. They're not trying to impress the world. They're trying to impress the version of you that still lives in their head. That's why the timing was so perfect. That's why the posts suddenly increased. That's why their life suddenly became so public. Because silence from you was unbearable. Your lack of reaction was louder than any argument. So they tried to force one. They checked to see if you watched. They waited to see if you liked. They monitored to see if you reacted. And every time you didn't, the pressure inside them grew. Because what they wanted wasn't your admiration. It was your emotion, jealousy, confusion, regret, anything that proved they still had access to your inner world. But what they didn't know is that while they were busy performing, you were busy evolving. You weren't staring at their page. You weren't measuring yourself against their life. You weren't questioning your worth. You were living. And nothing terrifies a performer more than an audience that doesn't show up. So they smiled harder. They posted more. They tried again. But each attempt only made the truth clearer. They weren't trying to move on. They were trying to pull you back. Because if you don't care, then their entire show has no meaning. And that is the thing they fear most. Every attempt to make you jealous was never really about you. It was a confession, a quiet, unintentional one. Because people don't try to trigger emotions in someone who no longer matters to them. They don't design scenes. They don't rehearse happiness. They don't manufacture moments, unless they are still emotionally tied to the person they're trying to impress. When they showed you someone new, what they were really saying was, please see that I'm still wanted. When they showed you success, they were saying, please see that I'm finally enough. When they showed you happiness, they were saying, please believe I made the right choice. But none of that is confidence. That is a request for validation. They were hoping you would feel smaller. But instead, they revealed how small they still feel. Because a person who truly knows their worth doesn't need to display it for someone who walked away. Because a person who truly knows they require witnesses. And what happened doesn't require witnesses. What you were watching wasn't strength. It was insecurity in costume. Every photo was a mask. Every smile was a filter. Every perfect moment was a shield. They weren't showing joy. They were hiding fear. Fear that you moved on. Fear that you no longer see them as special. And that fear is powerful. It makes people do strange things. It makes them post for people who aren't watching. It makes them perform for audiences that don't exist. It makes them turn their entire life into a message. But here's the part that changed everything. You saw it. You didn't feel jealous. You felt clarity. Because when you understand the psychology behind jealousy, you realize something. Jealousy is not a weapon of power. It's a weapon of need. They needed you to feel something so they could feel better about themselves. They needed proof that they still had influence over your emotions. And when you didn't react, they lost the one thing they were trying to protect, their illusion of control. Because instead of making you doubt yourself, they exposed themselves. When you didn't react, something inside them broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. Because silence is the one thing manipulation cannot survive. They weren't just hoping you would get jealous. They were hoping you would prove that they still mattered. A glance, anything. Your response was supposed to validate their performance, but you gave them nothing, and nothing is terrifying to someone who is desperate for control. You didn't fight, you didn't chase, you didn't compare yourself, you didn't explain, you just kept living. And that was the part they weren't prepared for. Because when someone can no longer affect you, they lose their power over you. They expected emotion, they expected pain, they expected jealousy, they got peace. Your silence told them, you are no longer relevant in my emotional world. And that cuts deeper than any insult ever could. They wanted to be important to you, even if that importance came from hurting you. But when you didn't react, they realized something devastating. They were performing for someone who had already left the theater. That's why they escalated. More posts, more displays, more obvious attempts. Because when the first performance doesn't get applause, insecure people perform harder. They need confirmation that they still exist in your mind. And the longer you stayed quiet, the louder they became. But volume is not strength, it's panic. Every new attempt to make you jealous was another proof that the first one failed. Every new show of happiness was another sign of how desperately they needed you to notice. They were no longer trying to make you jealous. They were trying to make you look. Because if you don't look, their story dies. And that's the truth they can't handle. Here's the part they will never understand. You were never in competition with them. Not for attention. Not for status. Not for validation. You left the game before they even realized they were still playing. While they were busy trying to prove something to you, you were busy building something for yourself. That's why their jealousy trap failed. Because jealousy only works on someone who still wants what the other person has. But you didn't want their new relationship, you didn't want their image, you didn't want their performance, you wanted peace, and you chose it. That choice changed everything. They thought they were showing you how well they were doing. What they were really showing you was how deeply you still lived in their mind. Every post, every appearance, every "look how happy I am" moment was a letter addressed to you, but you never opened it. And unopened letters drive insecure people insane because they don't know if you saw it. They don't know if you care. They don't know if it worked. So they keep sending more. That's why their behavior started to look desperate. Because it was. They weren't trying to hurt you anymore. They were trying to reach you, but you were already gone. Emotionally, mentally, energetically. And when someone realizes they no longer have access to you, they panic. Because access is power. And they lost it. He didn't block them out of revenge. He didn't ignore them to punish. You simply moved on. And moving on is the most humiliating thing for someone who needs to matter to you. You didn't become cold. You became clear. Clear about what you deserve. Clear about what no longer gets your energy. And clarity is a threat to anyone who survives on manipulation. So let them keep performing. Let them keep trying to look impressive. Let them keep staging moments they hope will reach you. Because every time they do, they're admitting the same truth. You are the one that mattered, not their new life, not their new image. You, and the fact that you no longer need them, is the thing that will follow them everywhere, while you keep walking forward, free, unbothered, and finally at peace.